The old station clock struck noon, just as the train's whistle echoed through the Montana Valley. Ethan Harper stood alone on the weathered wooden platform outside the depot in Hamilton. Dust drifted across the tracks, carried by a dry summer wind that smelled of pine, sage, and distant rain. His hat shaded tired blue eyes, but it could not hide the years that grief had carved into his face. He had come to meet a woman whose face he only knew from a faded photograph. He believed that before sunset, his lonely ranch would finally have a new beginning. Instead, a stranger would step off the train, look him straight in the eye, and quietly say the 7 words that changed every plan he had made. "You paid for the wrong bride, mister." Everything after that would become a story the Bitterroot Valley would remember for years. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're listening from today. Stories always travel farther when we share the trail together. The summer of 1889 had been kinder than the terrible winters before it, but kindness came late to the Harper Ranch. 3 years earlier, a sickness had taken Ethan's wife, Hannah. It swept through the valley without mercy, leaving empty chairs at dinner tables and silent bedrooms across western Montana. Since then, every sunrise had begun the same way. Before daylight touched the hills, Ethan saddled his horse, checked broken fences, hauled water from the creek, repaired whatever had failed overnight, and hurried back before his little daughter woke. 8-year-old Lily had stopped asking when her mother would return. Children eventually learned when certain questions only made grown men stare out windows. She no longer laughed as loudly. She no longer chased butterflies through the tall grass. Sometimes Ethan caught her sitting beside Hannah's old rocking chair, with one of her mother's shawls folded across her lap. She never cried. That somehow hurt even more. Neighbors tried helping during the first year. Mrs. Collins brought fresh pies. Old Ben Crawford fixed the leaking roof. The preacher visited every Sunday after church. But little by little, everyone returned to their own lives. The Harper Ranch remained standing, but it no longer felt alive. The cattle numbers had dropped after 2 difficult winters. The barn needed repairs. The fields were smaller than they had once been. Bills rested inside a tin box on Ethan's kitchen shelf, growing into a stack he avoided opening. Late one evening, after Lily had fallen asleep beside the fireplace, Ethan unfolded an advertisement from a newspaper printed back east. Respectable ladies seeking honorable homes in the American West. He stared at those words until the fire burned low. He wasn't searching for romance. He wasn't trying to replace Hannah. No one ever could. He simply wanted someone willing to help build a home where laughter might live again. After weeks of careful letters, one woman answered. Her name was Elena Brooks. She had written with neat handwriting and gentle honesty. She taught children in Ohio. She loved reading by lamplight. She had never seen mountains. She admitted she feared the unknown, but she believed people deserved second chances. Her last letter arrived wrapped inside blue paper. "I don't know what waits for me in Montana," she had written, "but perhaps lonely people can build something stronger than perfect strangers." Those words convinced Ethan. He sold 2 healthy calves to pay for her journey west. It was nearly everything he had left. Now he waited beneath the blazing afternoon sun. Beside him stood Lily wearing her cleanest dress, carefully patched at both elbows. She held a tiny bouquet of purple lupin flowers gathered that morning. "Papa," Ethan looked down. "What is it, sweetheart? Do you think she'll like me?" The question landed softly, but it struck his heart harder than any hammer. He crouched beside her. "I reckon anyone worth knowing already will." Lily smiled a little, though nervousness remained behind her bright green eyes. The train appeared around the bend. Steam rolled across the tracks like morning fog. Metal wheels screamed against iron rails until the engine slowed beside the platform. Passengers began stepping down one after another. Miners, traveling salesmen, young families carrying babies, a preacher, an elderly couple. Ethan searched every face. Then he saw her. She stood quietly in the doorway of the final passenger car. She wasn't the woman from the photograph. The picture Ethan kept folded inside his pocket showed someone with light hair tied neatly beneath a bonnet. This woman had chestnut hair escaping loose around her shoulders after the long journey. She wore a simple brown traveling dress covered in trail dust. Her sleeves were rolled slightly above strong wrists marked by years of honest labor. She carried only one worn leather suitcase. No jewelry. No expensive hat. Nothing unnecessary. She paused before stepping onto the platform, studying the valley stretching beyond the station. There was fear in her eyes, but there was also determination. Ethan walked toward her. Every step suddenly felt heavier. He removed his hat. "Miss Brooks." She turned. For a brief second, confusion crossed her face. Then sadness followed. She glanced at Lily clutching the little bouquet. She looked back at Ethan. "I'm afraid," she began quietly, "there's been a mistake." The sounds of the busy station seemed to disappear. Only the wind remained. Ethan swallowed. "What kind of mistake?" The young woman lowered her eyes. "My name isn't Alina Brooks." Silence settled between them. Lily looked from one adult to the other without understanding. Ethan's fingers tightened around his hat. "I don't follow." The woman drew a slow breath. "My name is Caroline Hayes." She hesitated before continuing. "The woman you expected came all the way to the station in Cincinnati." "What happened?" Caroline looked toward the train. "She couldn't board." "Why?" She said she wasn't strong enough to leave everything she'd ever known. Ethan closed his eyes for one painful moment. Months of hope slipped quietly through his fingers. "So why are you here?" Caroline answered with complete honesty. "Because she handed me the ticket." Ethan stared. "She what?" "I had nowhere left to go." Her voice remained calm, but her hands betrayed her. They trembled slightly against the handle of her suitcase. "I lost my position at a sewing factory after it closed. My father passed away last winter. My younger brother joined the railroad crews farther west, and I've heard nothing since." She forced herself to meet Ethan's eyes. "I wasn't stealing from you. I was trying to survive." Lily slowly stepped closer. Caroline noticed the child immediately. Her expression softened. "I told myself I would explain everything the moment I arrived. You deserve the truth. I expected you to send me back on the next train." Ethan said nothing. His thoughts refused to settle. Every dollar he owned had paid for this journey. Every hope he carried rested on someone who had never arrived. Yet the woman standing before him could have hidden the truth. She could have pretended to be Alina. Instead, she risked being stranded in a town where she knew no one. Lily tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve. He looked down. The little girl whispered, just loudly enough for him to hear. "She looks lonely." Those 3 words broke something inside him. He looked again at Caroline. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't making excuses. She simply stood there waiting for whatever came next. The afternoon breeze lifted a loose strand of hair across her face. She brushed it away with tired fingers. "I can work," she said. "I cook. I sew. I know how to care for children. I'll clean hotel rooms if I must. I only ask you not to think I came here to deceive you." Ethan noticed worn patches on her gloves. He noticed carefully repaired stitching along the hem of her dress. People who had lived easy lives rarely mended clothes that many times. He believed hardship when he saw it. Lily suddenly held out her small bouquet. "For you." Caroline blinked in surprise. "For me." "They're not fancy," Lily admitted. "But they're my favorite." Caroline accepted the flowers as though someone had handed her treasure. No one spoke. The station became busy again around them. Wagons rolled past. A blacksmith laughed somewhere nearby. The conductor shouted final boarding calls. Still, the three remained standing together. Finally, Ethan took one slow step forward. He extended his rough, weathered hand. "Miss Hayes." She looked at it without moving. "I can't promise the future. I can't promise comfort. My ranch needs fixing. My roof leaks. My daughter deserves more than I've been able to give her." He smiled for the first time in many months. "But I can promise you'll never have to hide the truth under my roof." Caroline looked from his hand to Lily's hopeful face. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Very slowly, she reached forward. Their hands met beneath the wide Montana sky. Neither of them realized someone else had been watching the entire exchange from across the street. A sharply dressed man standing outside the Valley Mercantile lowered his newspaper with narrowed eyes. He recognized Ethan Harper immediately. And the stranger who had arrived instead of the promised bride had just become the opportunity he had been waiting for. The man across the street folded his newspaper with slow, careful hands. His name was Silas Whitmore, and almost everyone in Raventon knew better than to mistake his calm smile for kindness. He owned the largest general store in the valley. He also held more unpaid ranch notes than the local bank itself. Whenever a family lost their land, Whitmore somehow managed to buy it before anyone else even heard it was for sale. From beneath the brim of his black hat, he watched Ethan help Caroline lift her worn suitcase into the wagon. He watched little Lily climb onto the seat between them. Most of all, he watched the way strangers could become allies in a single afternoon. Silas smiled to himself. People who carried secrets were often easier to break. He climbed into his own buggy and quietly rode away. The road home stretched nearly 12 miles through rolling meadows and towering ponderosa pines. The afternoon sun painted long golden stripes across the trail, while grasshoppers leaped through the tall grass beside the wagon wheels. No one spoke for several minutes. Only the steady rhythm of the horses filled the silence. Lily was the first to break it. "Have you ever seen mountains before?" Caroline smiled. "Only in books." "Were they this big?" "No. Bigger. They weren't big enough." Lily giggled. "They're even prettier after it rains." Caroline looked toward the endless blue ridges rising above the valley. "I believe you." She wasn't pretending. The mountains seemed almost alive. Nothing in Ohio had prepared her for the feeling of standing beneath skies that wide. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a brick wall. It looked like open country. Ethan kept his eyes on the trail. He wasn't sure what to say. He had imagined this ride dozens of times. He expected awkward conversation with a schoolteacher named Alina. Instead, fate had placed someone entirely different beside him. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You said you worked in a sewing factory." Caroline nodded. "Nearly 7 years." "What happened?" "The owner sold everything after business slowed." "I'm sorry." "So was everyone else." She gave a small smile that carried more sadness than humor. 200 people walked out those doors on the same afternoon. "And afterward, I took washing. I mended clothes. I cleaned houses. But work became harder to find every month." She rested both hands on the small suitcase in her lap. "My father became ill before winter. I stayed with him until the end." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "So am I." Neither spoke again for several minutes. Some grief didn't need explaining. It recognized itself. They reached a narrow wooden bridge crossing Cold Creek just before sunset. The water sparkled beneath them. Lily pointed excitedly. "That's where I caught my first fish." "You did?" Caroline asked. "It was tiny." Ethan said it was mostly bones. "It still counted." "It absolutely counted," Caroline laughed. The sound drifted through the valley like birdsong. Ethan hadn't expected her laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't forced. It sounded genuine. He realized something surprising. He couldn't remember the last time laughter had echoed from his wagon. The Harper Ranch appeared just as the evening sky turned shades of amber and crimson. It wasn't impressive. The split-rail fence leaned in several places. The barn roof sagged near one corner. A windmill creaked slowly above the well. The cabin itself was sturdy but tired. Years of harsh winters had weathered every log. Caroline stepped down from the wagon without speaking. She studied everything carefully. Not with disappointment, with understanding. People who had known hardship recognized it wherever they found it. Lily hurried ahead. "This is home." Caroline smiled softly. "It's beautiful." Ethan almost laughed. "No one's called it that in years." "I just did." Inside, the cabin was clean but worn. The kitchen table carried scratches from decades of family meals. An old quilt rested across a rocking chair near the fireplace. Above the mantel hung a single-framed photograph. A young woman smiled gently while holding a baby wrapped in blankets. Caroline didn't have to ask who she was. She quietly removed her bonnet. "Your wife?" Ethan nodded. "Hannah." She had kind eyes. "She did." The room fell silent again. Lily walked over to the photograph and dusted the frame with her sleeve. She did it so naturally, it was obvious this had become part of her routine. Caroline looked away to give father and daughter their privacy. Instead, she wandered into the kitchen. The shelves were nearly empty. A little flour, beans, salt, coffee, a few jars of preserved peaches. Not much else. She closed the cupboard without saying a word. There was no judgment in her face, only quiet determination. After supper, Ethan carried water from the well while Lily showed Caroline the small room prepared for her. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, one window overlooking the pasture. Nothing more. "It's not fancy," Lily admitted. "I like it." "You do?" "It has a nice view." Lily smiled proudly. "In spring, deer come right up to that tree." "I'll look for them." The little girl hesitated. Then she asked very softly, "Are you staying tomorrow?" Caroline looked at the child for several seconds. "I don't know." "You don't? I suppose your father should decide." Lily lowered her eyes. "I hope he says yes." Long after Lily had fallen asleep, Ethan sat alone on the porch. The stars stretched across the Montana sky, in numbers no city could ever hold. He heard the cabin door open behind him. Caroline stepped outside carrying 2 tin cups. "I found coffee." He accepted one with a grateful nod. For several minutes, they simply listened to the crickets. Finally, Caroline spoke. "I should leave in the morning." Ethan looked toward the dark hills. "Where would you go?" "I'll find work. In Raventon. If they'll hire me." "They won't." She turned. "How do you know?" "Because jobs are scarce. And because a woman alone without family is easy for people to judge." She looked down into her cup. "I've learned that already." Ethan sighed. "I won't ask you to become someone you're not. But if you're willing." He searched for the right words. "You could stay here." "As what?" "A partner's." She frowned slightly. "You mean your wife?" "No. I mean someone helping keep this place alive. You'd trust me. You told the truth when lying would have been easier. That counts for something." Caroline's eyes glistened in the lantern light. "No one's trusted me in a very long time." The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise as always. When he stepped into the kitchen, he stopped in the doorway. Fresh biscuits rested on the table. Coffee filled the room with warmth. Bacon sizzled gently inside an iron skillet. Caroline stood beside the stove, wearing a plain apron she had found hanging behind the pantry door. "Morning," she said. "I hope you don't mind." Ethan stared. "I haven't smelled breakfast like this since." He couldn't finish. She understood anyway. "Sit down before it gets cold." Lily came running barefoot into the room. Her eyes grew wide. "Biscuits." She climbed into her chair so quickly it nearly tipped over. Breakfast became something Ethan hadn't experienced in years. Conversation. Laughter. Hope. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it felt like a family trying to remember how happiness sounded. Over the next several days, Caroline never waited to be asked. She patched torn curtains. She scrubbed years of soot from the windows until sunlight poured into the cabin. She planted herbs beside the kitchen door. She mended Ethan's oldest work shirts so carefully they almost looked new. She even found time to sit beneath the oak tree each evening while teaching Lily to read from an old Bible Hannah had treasured. One afternoon, Ethan returned from repairing fences and stopped outside the open window. Inside, Lily stumbled over a difficult word. Caroline didn't correct her immediately. Instead, she smiled. "Try again." Lily sounded it out slowly. When she finally read the sentence correctly, Caroline clapped her hands. "I knew you could." Lily threw her arms around her without thinking. The little girl's laughter drifted across the yard. Ethan quietly removed his hat. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes. He hadn't heard that laugh in nearly 3 years. If this part of their journey has touched your heart, let me know in the comments. Would you have opened your home to a stranger who told you the truth? As the days passed, Ethan began to believe that perhaps fate had not made a mistake after all. But while hope was quietly returning to the Harper ranch, another plan was taking shape across town. Inside his office above the mercantile, Silas Whitmore unfolded an old land survey, placed his finger directly over the Harper property, and smiled. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded document bearing the county seal. "Let's see how long that unexpected bride can save you," he murmured. Outside his window, dark storm clouds gathered over the valley. And this time, they carried far more than rain. By the end of August, the Harper Ranch no longer felt like a place that was merely surviving. It had begun living again. Morning sunlight poured through windows that had once been clouded with dust. Fresh herbs grew beside the porch. The garden behind the cabin pushed tiny green shoots through the soil, and every evening the smell of warm bread drifted across the yard. Even the horses seemed calmer. Old Duke, Ethan's stubborn bay gelding, who usually pinned his ears back whenever anyone entered the barn, quietly allowed Caroline to brush his coat. "You've spoiled him," Ethan joked one evening. Caroline smiled without looking up. "No." She scratched Duke gently beneath his mane. "I simply asked instead of forcing him." Ethan laughed. "Maybe I ought to remember that." She looked at him with amused eyes. "It works on people too." For a second, neither of them spoke. Then both laughed quietly. It was becoming easier now. Conversation no longer felt like work. Lily noticed before either adult did. While gathering eggs one morning, she looked from Ethan to Caroline and grinned. "You smile more now." Ethan nearly dropped the basket he was carrying. "Do I?" "Uh-huh." She pointed at Caroline. "And she does too." Caroline lowered her eyes, trying to hide a blush. "I suppose we're both sleeping better." Lily shook her head. "No. You were lonely. You aren't as lonely anymore." Children often said the hardest truths with the simplest words. Neither Ethan nor Caroline argued. One cool afternoon, clouds rolled across the valley, bringing welcome rain after weeks of dry weather. They hurried to gather laundry from the clothesline. As Caroline reached for the last quilt, a strong gust of wind caught it like a sail. She laughed as it nearly pulled her across the yard. Ethan caught one corner just before it blew away. For one brief moment, they stood close together beneath the flapping blanket. Rain began falling around them. Tiny drops sparkled on Caroline's hair. "You've got rain on your face," Ethan said. "So do you." Neither moved. Neither seemed eager to let go of the quilt. Then Lily called from the porch. "You're both getting soaked." They looked at one another and burst into laughter before running toward the cabin together. It was the first carefree moment either of them had shared in years. That evening, while Lily slept upstairs, Caroline found Ethan sitting alone on the porch. He was turning Hannah's wedding ring over in his fingers. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You never do." She sat beside him. The rain had left the valley smelling of wet earth and pine. For a long while, they watched the moon rise over the hills. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I still talk to Hannah sometimes." Caroline nodded gently. "I think that's beautiful. I always tell her about Lily." He stared into the darkness. "Lately," he hesitated, "I've been telling her about you." Caroline looked at him quietly. "I hope she wouldn't mind." Ethan smiled sadly. "Hannah had the biggest heart I've ever known." He slipped the ring back into his pocket. "If she could see this house now." He glanced toward the glowing kitchen window. "I think she'd be grateful someone brought the light back." Caroline blinked away sudden tears. "No one has ever said something so kind to me." The next morning, trouble arrived. A polished black carriage rolled into the yard, sending chickens scattering across the grass. Silas Whitmore stepped down wearing an expensive coat untouched by dust. Behind him came a thin man carrying a leather briefcase. "Morning, Mr. Harper." Ethan walked out of the barn. "What brings you here?" Silas smiled politely. "I thought neighbors ought to visit." "We aren't neighbors." "We nearly are." His eyes wandered slowly toward the creek flowing beside the pasture. "Fine water. It keeps this ranch alive." "So I've heard." Caroline stepped onto the porch beside Lily. Silas tipped his hat. "You must be the lady everyone's talking about." Caroline answered calmly. "I'm Caroline Hayes." "I know." His smile widened. "I also know you weren't the woman Mr. Harper paid to marry." Silence settled across the yard. Lily instinctively reached for Caroline's hand. Ethan stepped forward. "If you've got business, say it." "I do." Silas accepted several folded papers from the man beside him. "You missed 2 loan payments." "I know." "According to these documents." He unfolded one page with exaggerated care. "The bank may begin foreclosure proceedings within 30 days. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I've spoken with the bank." "You spoke with the clerk." "I own the debt now." Those words landed like a hammer. Silas smiled pleasantly. "I purchased several outstanding ranch notes last week." He looked directly at Caroline. "It would be unfortunate if your unusual household situation complicated matters." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. Silas shrugged. "People become nervous when contracts begin with deception." "There was no deception," Caroline answered firmly. "I told the truth the moment I arrived." "Oh?" He raised an eyebrow. "Can everyone in town verify that?" Caroline remained silent. Silas turned back toward Ethan. "I'll make this easy. Sell me your south pasture and the creek rights. I'll erase the debt." "No." Silas chuckled softly. "I expected that answer." He climbed back into the carriage. "I'll see you in court." The carriage disappeared down the road, leaving only dust behind. Lily looked frightened. "Is he taking our home?" Ethan knelt beside her. "I'm going to do everything I can to stop that." Caroline watched the road long after the carriage vanished. "He planned this." Ethan nodded. "He has for years. He doesn't want the ranch. He wants the water." The creek flowed year-round. Every neighboring ranch depended on it during dry summers. Whoever controlled the creek controlled the valley. That afternoon, Ethan rode into town to meet with the bank. Caroline stayed behind repairing harnesses in the barn. While searching an old cabinet for leather straps, she discovered a small wooden box tucked beneath a shelf. Inside lay several faded papers. Old receipts, land surveys, tax records. At the bottom rested a folded envelope sealed with red wax. It bore Ethan's father's handwriting. Property agreement, 1871. Caroline frowned. The seal had never been broken. She carefully set it aside without opening it. When Ethan returned after sunset, exhausted and discouraged, she handed him the envelope. "I found this." He stared at it in disbelief. "I've never seen this before." It was hidden beneath the workbench. He slowly turned it over. "My father must have put it there. You should open it." Together they unfolded the brittle pages. Ethan read silently, then suddenly looked up. "What is it?" Caroline asked. His hands trembled. "This isn't a personal letter." "What is it?" "It's the original water agreement." She leaned closer. "The one before the county records." Ethan nodded. "My father signed a partnership with every neighboring ranch." "What does that mean?" "It means—" Hope slowly returned to his eyes. "The creek was never meant to belong to one ranch. It legally serves the whole valley." Caroline looked at him in astonishment. "If that's true, Silas can't own it. Not without breaking the original agreement." For the first time since Whitmore's visit, Ethan smiled. It could save everything. The next morning, they rode into town to show the document to the county recorder. But before they reached the courthouse, they found the office locked. A handwritten notice hung on the door. Closed until Monday. It was only Thursday. Ethan frowned. "That's strange." An elderly shopkeeper across the street quietly approached. "You didn't hear?" "Hear what?" The recorder left suddenly. "Why?" The old man lowered his voice. "People are saying Whitmore offered him work in Helena." Caroline exchanged a worried glance with Ethan. The timing felt far too convenient. If someone wanted important records to disappear, they already knew exactly where to begin looking. Before the next chapter unfolds, tell me in the comments, do you believe truth always finds its way into the light, even when powerful people try to hide it? As they turned to leave, a young stable boy came running down the street, breathless. "Mr. Harper." Ethan stopped. The boy struggled to catch his breath before speaking. "Your barn. What about it?" The boy's face had turned pale. "You'd better get home. They're saying." He swallowed hard. "Your barn is on fire." Ethan didn't wait for another word. He leaped into the wagon, snapped the reins, and the horses lunged forward. Caroline climbed beside him while Lily held tightly to the seat, her small hands trembling. The ride home felt longer than it ever had before. Dark smoke was already rising above the trees. Ethan's stomach tightened. "Please, Lord," he whispered, "not now." As they rounded the final bend, flames licked along one side of the old hay shed beside the barn. Neighbors were already there, forming a line from the creek, passing heavy buckets from hand to hand. Old Ben Crawford shouted, "The barn's still standing. We stopped most of it before the wind could carry it." Without hesitation, Ethan jumped from the wagon and grabbed a bucket. Caroline tied on an old apron, filled another bucket, and joined the line beside him. No one cared about muddy boots or soaked clothes. Everyone worked together. After nearly an hour, the last flames finally died beneath clouds of steam. The barn had survived. One corner of the hay shed had collapsed, but the livestock were safe. Ethan leaned against the fence, breathing hard. If we'd been another 10 minutes later. Old Ben nodded. You would have lost everything. The sheriff walked slowly around the burned ground. He crouched beside the blackened grass near the fence line. Then he picked something up. It was a broken glass bottle with the smell of lamp oil still clinging to it. The sheriff looked toward Ethan. This wasn't lightning. Silence settled over the yard. Someone had tried to burn the Harper ranch. That evening, the neighbors refused to leave. Mrs. Collins brought fresh stew. Several ranch hands stayed to help repair the damaged shed. Even people who barely knew Ethan offered lumber, nails, and feed for the horses. Caroline watched quietly from the porch. Only weeks earlier she had believed she would spend her life alone. Now strangers worked late into the night to protect the place she had begun calling home in her heart. Old Ben finally sat beside her. Folks around here don't scare easy. She smiled. I noticed. He looked toward Ethan repairing the fence. You've been good for him. I think he's been good for me too. Ben chuckled. Sometimes the Lord sends us what we asked for. He paused. And sometimes he sends something even better. Caroline looked across the yard at Ethan. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future she had been too afraid to hope for. Monday morning arrived with clear skies. The courthouse in Raventon was filled long before the hearing began. Word of the attempted fire had spread through the valley. Nearly every rancher within 20 miles came to watch. Silas Whitmore entered confidently, dressed in his finest black coat. He smiled at Ethan, as though the outcome had already been decided. Judge Samuel Reed took his seat. We are here regarding the Harper property and disputed water rights. Silas's attorney stood first. Your Honor, Mr. Harper has repeatedly failed to meet his financial obligations. The debt is valid. The property should be transferred immediately. The lawyer sat. Judge Reed turned toward Ethan. Mr. Harper. Ethan rose. I won't deny I owe money. He spoke steadily. But the creek they're trying to claim was never intended to belong to one man. He placed the folded document on the judge's desk. This was signed by my father and 6 neighboring ranchers 18 years ago. Judge Reed carefully opened the fragile papers. The courtroom grew silent. Every eye followed the judge as he slowly read each page. Several long minutes passed. Finally, he looked toward the county surveyor seated near the front. Have you examined this agreement? I have, Your Honor. And the surveyor stood. The signatures are authentic. The land descriptions match the original survey. The creek was established as a shared water source for every ranch named in the agreement. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Silas Whitmore's smile disappeared. His attorney quickly stood again. This document was never filed. The surveyor calmly answered. Actually, he reached into his own case. It was. Everyone turned toward him. I located a duplicate copy yesterday evening. Where? In the old county archives. The previous recorder had placed it in a storage ledger decades ago. Judge Reed adjusted his spectacles. So the agreement has always existed. Yes, sir. Silas's attorney tried again. But the debt. The debt remains, the judge interrupted. But the water rights do not belong to the debt. He looked directly at Silas. You cannot seize property that legally serves multiple families. Silas's face turned red. Judge Reed continued. As for the attempted fire, the sheriff stepped forward, carrying the broken bottle recovered near the barn. We interviewed several witnesses. He looked toward Silas. A stable hand saw one of Mr. Whitmore's hired men leaving the Harper property shortly before smoke was reported. Silas immediately stood. I had nothing to do with that. We're still investigating, the sheriff replied. But your employee has already confessed. He was promised extra pay to frighten Mr. Harper into selling. Gasps filled the courtroom. Silas's shoulders sagged. The confidence that had followed him into the room disappeared. Judge Reed struck his gavel. This court rejects the request to seize the Harper water rights. He looked toward Ethan. You will be granted additional time to satisfy the remaining debt. Then he turned toward Silas. And this court strongly recommends the sheriff continue his criminal investigation. The hearing was over. For the first time in months, Ethan felt as though he could finally breathe. Outside the courthouse, neighbors surrounded the Harper family. Old Ben clapped Ethan on the shoulder. We'll help rebuild that shed. Another rancher stepped forward. I'll buy 2 calves this fall instead of 1. Mrs. Collins smiled warmly. And I've already organized a quilting circle for winter. No one had been asked. They simply came. Caroline quietly wiped a tear from her cheek. A few months earlier, she had believed the world had forgotten her. Now she stood surrounded by people who treated her like family. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Ethan turned toward Caroline. Lily. He smiled. Would you mind waiting with Mrs. Collins for a few minutes? The little girl grinned. I think I know what's happening. She skipped away, pretending not to watch. Ethan reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch. I've carried this since Hannah passed. He opened it carefully. Inside rested a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I kept waiting for life to become perfect again. He shook his head. I finally understand something. Caroline listened quietly. Perfect days don't come first. They grow from ordinary ones. He stepped closer. When you stepped off that train. He smiled. I thought every plan I'd made had fallen apart. I was wrong. My best plan arrived wearing the wrong name. Caroline laughed through her tears. I almost got back on that train. I'm thankful you didn't. He gently took both of her hands. Caroline Hayes. You never pretended to be someone else. You chose honesty when fear would have been easier. You gave my daughter her laughter back. You gave this house its warmth. And somewhere along the trail. He smiled. You gave my heart another chance. He held up the ring. Will you marry me? Caroline covered her mouth as tears finally escaped. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she nodded. Yes. With all my heart. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Behind them came the unmistakable sound of applause. They both turned. Half the town had quietly remained outside the courthouse. Lily ran faster than everyone else. She threw her arms around Caroline. So, the little girl looked up hopefully. Can I call you Mama forever now? Caroline knelt until they were eye level. She brushed a loose curl away from Lily's face. You can. Lily hugged her so tightly that neither of them could stop crying. Even several old ranchers wiped their eyes. That autumn became one the valley would remember. Neighbors worked together to rebuild the Harper barn stronger than before. The garden produced more vegetables than anyone expected. The first calves born that spring survived the winter. One by one, Ethan repaid every dollar he owed. Silas Whitmore eventually sold his mercantile and left Raventon. People rarely spoke about him after that. They preferred telling a different story. The story of the woman who arrived carrying the wrong ticket. The little girl who offered wildflowers instead of questions. The widowed rancher who chose trust over fear. Years later, travelers passing through Raventon often noticed laughter spilling from the porch of the Harper Ranch. Children played beneath the cottonwoods. Fresh bread cooled on the windowsill. A woman with kind brown eyes waved from the garden. And every evening, as the sun settled behind the Montana mountains, Ethan still reached for Caroline's hand. Not because he feared losing her, but because some blessings were too precious to take for granted. If this story reminded you that honesty, kindness, and courage can change a life, we'd love to hear where you're watching from. And if you enjoy heartfelt Wild West stories like this one, consider subscribing so we can share another journey with you on the next trail.